now to our law keynote, which will be presented by Michal Gal. Michal, she's a law professor at the University of Haifa, and she was a visiting professor at quite a lot of prestigious places, such as, for instance, the law schools in Chicago, Georgetown, and at NYU. She is in the competition law circles very prominent because she is now the president of ASCOLA. We are very thankful for having her as a president there. And of course, she is a very, very influential legal scholar, and she has published widely in the field, and she has won several awards and prizes. And we are super happy that you accepted the invitation to come to Mannheim for the CLEEN conference. And Michal, the floor is yours. Without much further ado.
It's a pleasure to be here. It's actually a holiday in Israel and my family is celebrating. But once I got this invitation, I thought this is an incredible conference. It's an incredible opportunity for me, to hear about, the work of rising scholars in the field. And I really enjoyed the last 2 days. Thank you all. And I hope to give you a glimpse of what I think is an important issue for competition law and for regulation. So I'm going to talk about competition and AI. I couldn't resist the pun. The linguistic pun with algorithms. So the structure of the talk is, the talk has 3 parts. First, I'm going to give a very short primer on algorithms. Then I'm going to talk about their effects on competition. And finally, I'm going to talk about some partial solutions that might come both from law and from markets. Let me start by talking a bit about algorithms. So what are algorithms? Algorithms are structured decision-making processes that automate computational procedures to generate outcomes on the basis of data inputs. Now, I'm sure you all understood what I said right now. Let me say it in a very simplistic way, okay? So you have data as an input and as an output, and in between, you have a decisional process. Now, it might be a simple decisional process like a decision tree, or it might be much more complicated, like AI algorithms based on neural networks, which we call deep learning. Now, there are several types of algorithms. I'm not going to talk about all of them, but I do want to mention several typologies which are important for the rest of my lecture. So first, I want to differentiate between expert algorithms and learning algorithms. Expert algorithms are those in which the coder decides when he writes the algorithm, how much weight to give to each feature. Okay, so there's an external coder. By the way, the coder might be AI itself, doesn't necessarily have to be a human, but the algorithm then is static in the sense that you get data, the data is analyzed in the exact same way to create outcomes. The more interesting ones are learning algorithms. Learning algorithms are those that are based on machine learning, that learn from feedback, from a feedback loop, okay? How to make the decisions better. Now, the feedback loop might have a human in the loop. It might be that a human would say, this is a good outcome. Okay, so change your algorithm. Or it might be that the algorithm itself learns from the reactions that it gets. It might be market reactions. Okay, it might be reaction to prices if this is a pricing algorithm. Okay. So this is the difference between supervised learning and unsupervised learning. And of course, we all have heard about neural networks, deep learning, whether that try to imitate on a very basic level, of course, the structure of our own mind. And they have several levels of nodes in which the algorithm itself creates connections. Now, these are extremely useful when you have very big data, okay? And you need to find correlations. One of the problems of algorithms, and computer scientists are working on it, is that algorithms often give us correlations. They do not provide causality. We do not necessarily know why in each case, especially machine learning algorithms, why they've reached a certain outcome. Okay, so what has changed in the world? Because, you know, algorithms are not new. This is something that has been around for quite a long time. You know, even neural networks have been around for at least 30 or 40 years. It's a funny story is that the person who thought about them, you know, he could not prove that that his algorithm is efficient. Everybody laughed at him, okay, because there wasn't enough data that was available to test the algorithm. But now in the age of big data, things are changing. So some of the technological developments, and I find it useful to think about these technological development as based on the data value chain. Okay, I put here 3 parts of it, but there are of course more: collection, and then synthesis and analysis of the data, and then its usage. So we have a lot of interesting changes in the last 2 decades or so. Collection. Think about how many sensors we now have. Think about the web and how much information the web creates. Organization. Algorithms assist us in organizing the data, because having the data by itself is problematic, okay? If you have too much data and you don't have the tools to organize it efficiently, it's not going to give you a lot of value. And then algorithms can also create data. And here I want to relate to another study that I have with Orla Linsky from LSE on synthetic data. Synthetic data, already 2024, generates more than 60% of the data used by machine learning algorithms, which means that many types of data do not need to be collected anymore. Okay, I think that's a huge development. Okay, of course, you need a basis of real data, but then you can learn from it and generate synthetic data. We, of course, today have speedier information flow thanks to the internet. We have better tools of analysis, but again, the algorithms are not the story here. They're just the devices that are using what's happening in data worlds. There's a very big development. There has been over the past 2 decades in the storage of data. I don't have to tell you about the cloud. The cloud has reduced cost of storage of data significantly, which means that we can now use big data and it won't be so costly as it was in the past. Another difference is that there are more and more algorithms that enable us to engage in autonomous decisions. Pricing algorithms, for example, that price automatically. Okay, there's no human in the loop once the algorithm is put to use. And then there's the presentation of information. Think about the small computer that you all have at the palm of your hands. Okay, it enables us to present the information, which is generated sometimes by an algorithm. Ranking algorithms, for example, if you look at if you look for ranking of things, you have the information at the tip of your fingers. Okay, why is this going the other way? Okay, so just to give you a flavor, okay, this is the amount of data that we have now, 2023, that we already collected, and we are collecting more. This is going, you know, the graph is exponential. And of course, this data is very powerful. And just to give you a flavor of how data relates to algorithms, think about this. So you have more and better data. That data can create better predictions for the algorithm, which may lead to better products. That's on top. But the more and better data can also create better algorithms, which can then create better predictions. Now, these predictions can be used for better products in the in a certain market. But I think what's even more interesting is that we have a phenomenon which is called transfer learning. Transfer learning means that I can create an algorithm in one market for one use, and the algorithm learns to do something, some task, And then you can transfer it and use it for a completely different market. And sometimes a very different task. Okay, I don't have time to give you examples, but if you want, we can talk about it in the Q&A. Okay, so what do algorithms bring to the table? They bring lower costs, okay? They bring a speedier decision, which in a digital world might sometimes make a difference. They bring more sophistication. It's not that we are not sophisticated. We are. We can do these things. However, it would take us more time, okay? And especially if we're talking about market reactions, more sophistication might be important. They allow us to invest less decisional energy. One, example that I like to use here is think about Bill Gates, not Bill Gates, sorry, Steve Jobs. Steve Jobs, for all his adult life, wore the exact same clothes. Anybody know what? What did he wear? Jeans and a turtleneck, black turtleneck. Now, he was asked, I mean, he was one of the richest people. So he was asked, how come every day you're wearing the same clothes? And he said, because I don't want to invest energy in deciding what to wear. I'm conserving my energy for, the products that we all know about. Lastly, algorithms can potentially create less bias, but again, it depends on the algorithm, depends on the data you feed it. It depends on whether you've cleaned the data to ensure that it's not biased. But actually, algorithms can be fed data, synthetic data, for example, that limits biases. Okay, for example, Amazon's algorithm that was tested on CVs to choose CVs of job applicants. Okay, it was fed CVs of current employees, and many of them were men. What it did is it created bias against women. And the solution to that is to create synthetic CVs of women, successful women, okay? Feed it into the algorithm and lower the bias, okay? So these things are done already. What are some common uses of algorithms? So these are uses that I put here. This is in preparation for a talk I'm giving at the OECD in June, which are relevant to markets. Okay, so one of them, of course, is collecting and organizing the data. Another one is improving the use of existing data. So you have a data set. What can you do with the data set? Cleaning the data set by an algorithm, for example, can increase the use of existing data. Reducing the amount of needed data. That might be through transfer learning, or it might be through synthetic data, or it might be through a more efficient algorithm. Monitoring and mapping. Many algorithms are used today in order to crawl the web and look for the prices, for example, of other competitors. Predicting what would happen, for example, if I set my price at a certain level, or what would happen if I buy a certain rival. And of course, decision-making is another thing that we see in markets. Just an example of a very, very simple diagram of an algorithm which is engaged in monitoring and pricing. The algorithm collects the prices from the market. There's an algorithm who compares them, and then it decides whether to engage in a price war or not. Okay, and it continuously does that. Some statistics, so you'll see that what I'm talking about is not just, very futuristic. Some studies, some of them are not new, but there haven't been many new studies on these. So 2017 to 2023, you know how much has changed? So, but this is, the basis, okay? So in the US, more than 50% of sellers use pricing algorithms. And the EU, more than 67% of firms that monitor their competitors did so by algorithms, and 78% of them used pricing algorithms. Another study showed that 61% of websites engage in personalized ranking, and 22 of them engaged in personal pricing, much more than we would have thought, right? Netherlands, this is the most recent one. 55% of all suppliers use algorithms to monitor and 20% to price their products, okay? So what you see is a prevalent use, and this is only pricing algorithms. Of course, if we're talking about algorithms that organize the data, collect the data, monitor, etc., you have much more. Okay, so I get to the second part of my lecture, which is how do these algorithms affect competition? So I'm going to talk about two things. I'm going to talk about algorithms as facilitators of abuse of dominance, and I'm going to talk about algorithms as facilitators of coordination. Okay, these are the two things that I'm going to talk about. Let me start with this one. So how can algorithms affect abuse of dominance? First of all, they can help firms engage in excessive pricing. Okay, one reason is because if you have more data that you know about willingness to pay of consumers in the market, you can raise price. You can set the price at a level that better increases your own profits. Sorry. Another one. They might enable firms to engage in what Vicky Robertson has written about, which is excessive data collection. And you can ask whether this by itself comes under abuse of dominance, but at least some countries, including Germany, the answer would be yes. Okay, again, because these algorithms are better at collecting data. They can also assist firms in engaging in algorithmic predation. And here there's a very good article, actually two, one by Christopher Leslie, which is coming out in the NYU Law Review, another one by Julian Nowag and Thomas Cheng. And what they show is that for many years, the Chicago School view has dominated in the sense that it was believed that predation is usually irrational. It's irrational because you cannot recoup the investment. However, what they do, especially Christopher Leslie, what he does is he goes through these assumptions and he shows what might be different. Okay, so one thing that might be different is that an algorithm can better enable a firm to separate two groups, one of the marginal consumers and one of the super marginal consumers, those that would easily switch and those that would not easily switch. Okay, because one of the assumptions of the Chicago School was that there would be one price for all consumers, okay, in the market. And part of it was because it would be very hard to transact with each and every consumer differently. However, if the transaction is done online, for example, and via an algorithm, that problem is solved. Okay, so what they claim is that algorithms increase predation. And then there's another claim that algorithms can personalize prices. Okay, and these are discriminatory prices. If I get a different price than Martin gets, this is this price discrimination. But it raises a lot of interesting questions. For example, is this captured under competition law, for example? Because, you know, if it's done to the final consumer, we usually do not prohibit it because we think it is welfare increasing. But what happens in the world where not one firm engages in personalized prices, but a much larger percentage of the firms can do that? Are the welfare effects of the model that looks only at one case of discrimination in one firm, is it necessarily transferable to multiple markets? That's a question for the economist. I don't know the answer. I'm only putting the question. And then their refusal to supply essential data. Okay, that might also be abuse. Zach Abramson has written about it in the Yale Law Review, Yale Law Journal. And I think this is an interesting case of super competitive selective pricing, the case of Uber Technologies. Uber is competing with Lyft over drivers. And because of the network effects, each of them would like to have more drivers, of course. Now, Uber would like to pay more to the drivers that are more likely to then move to Lyft, because for every shift, the driver multi-homes, okay? He can decide whether he wants to go with Lyft or he wants to go with Uber for the next shift, okay? And what happened in this case is that Uber created a program which is called, they called it internally Hell, okay? And what they did is they targeted those drivers that had a stronger inclination, they saw in the data, they had a stronger inclination to move to Lyft, and they raised the prices for them, but only for them. So if you want, this is a reverse, or it's another kind of predation, which the algorithm supports, because now it's not as costly, because you don't have to target everybody. You only have to target those drivers that move, and you can do it on a continuous basis because you have a continuous data here. Finally, there's exclusion by distorting data interoperability. There's a very interesting roundtable in OECD 2021. I was very fortunate to participate in that. And the idea here is that you use the algorithm in order to raise your rival costs, in the sense that you organize the data, for example, in a way which would be hard for your competitor to then use. Okay, so these are just some examples of things that the literature has written about. And there are, of course, if we're talking about monopoly, we're also talking about monopolistic markets. And there's a very interesting article by McSweeney and Odea, who look at monopolistic competition, and they actually say that what algorithms can do is they can find smaller markets, okay, in which niche markets, they can separate out more niche markets than we could before. And then the question is, does that mean that they are dominant, or should these markets be defined as markets by themselves, or are they part of larger markets? Again, I leave the question open. I don't give the answer. I just want to put the issue to you. Another issue is that in our world, do we actually need dominance, or are there cases in which firms can abuse via algorithms, or consumers can abuse without dominance? In one of my papers, we talked about market power parasites. We talk about firms who tweak or use algorithms of ranking in order to put themselves on top and put their competitors below by manipulating it. And by the way, there's a whole industry of manipulation of such ranking algorithms in order to put yourself on top. Okay. What about algorithms as facilitators of collusion? Can they facilitate collusion? There's a wonderful, wonderful book by Ariel Ezrahi and Maurice Taki from 2016. They opened up this question with regard to coordination. And they talk about 4 ways that algorithms can assist in coordination. First of all is traditional collusion, okay? So here what we have is we have a cartellistic agreement. The algorithm is only used as a tool in order to facilitate that coordination. So an example would be the Topkins case, in which firms that sold posters online decided to engage in a cartel. However, the prices change all the time. So how do you do that? You all use the same algorithm. You create the algorithm in order to facilitate the coordination. That's a simple case. in antitrust. Okay, once you know the facts, it's simple. It's caught under our laws. More complicated are hub and spoke cartels. Okay, hub and spoke cartels, for example, are, this might be one example where what you have is you have firms supplying their information to one hub, and that hub then sets the price for consumers. Uber operates in this way. If you think about, the top ones as being the drivers, independent drivers, of course, but you can flip this. Okay, it might even be that you have firms, you have one hub which supplies pricing decisions for different firms in the market. And again, there are many examples of this. I can speak about it later. The third example is expert algorithms. And I talked about them before. These are the one where the coder decides before what are going to be the parameters of the decision. Okay. And here, what I did is I wrote for you, and sorry, I am not a computer scientist, tried, it's a very, very simple, follow the leader algorithms. So one of them determines the price, another one follows the price of the second one. Okay, very simple. What is most interesting, of course, are the cases of algorithms that learn by themselves to coordinate. Okay, so what you say is that you request, you put to the algorithm a certain task, for example, maximize my profits. And the algorithms by themselves learn to coordinate. Now, how do they do that? Do they do it? Well, the answer, the OECD panel from 2017 has said yes, by providing companies with powerful automated mechanisms to monitor prices, implement common policies, send market signals, or optimize joint profits with deep learning techniques. Algorithms might enable firms to achieve the same outcomes of traditional hardcore cartels through tacit collusion. So, I mean, you might think, well, this is science fiction, So there's a literature here. There are 3 strands in the literature that try to show that coordination among algorithms is actually real. Okay, so one of them is theoretical, one of them is experimental, and the third one is empirical. So let me say a bit about each. So with regard to the theoretical part, how do algorithms contribute to coordination? I find it very useful to think about Stigler's conditions for coordination, okay? Because George Stigler has said that for firms to coordinate, and by the way, he did not mean engage in an agreement. He talks about coordination in the economic sense, okay? So you need an agreement, you need detection of deviations, and you need punishment of those who deviate. And he did not mention it, but he assumed, of course, that you need high entry barriers in the market. And today we know that there are different market conditions that assist coordination. Now, if we apply this to algorithms, algorithms might assist firms in reaching an agreement because they provide a speedier calculation of the best joint profit maximizing price. They enable sophisticated calculation. For example, they are better at knowing whether a deviation is a deviation because of changing external market conditions or because a firm has decided to maximize its prices. It provides a rational decision. Very importantly, it's also a known recipe for action, okay? Because if you see the algorithm, if a computer scientist sees the algorithm or he can test it on data, he knows if you give it a certain input, what would be the output, okay? And there actually, Moshe Tenenholtz has shown that in such conditions, if you know the algorithm ahead, you can set the profit maximizing price in a one-shot game, okay? They also send a strong signal. There's a wonderful paper by 2 Harvard economists who show that the choice of how often the algorithm is going to monitor the price. And if you know that prices are going to be monitored every 24 hours, 5 hours, 1 second, send a signal to others operating in the market. It also affects detection. It enables better monitoring of prices of rivals, of distinguishing between the different prices. It also reduces incentives to deviate, because if you know that you are now, that if you change your price, so you lower it, you try to capture consumers, but this is a rapid market with many consumers, okay? Then if the algorithm of your rival is monitoring you and it automatically changes the price accordingly, you're not going to gain too many consumers, okay? That is not going to be profitable. So you're not going to do that, okay? So it reduces incentives to deviate, or it's not that you're going to do it, but you're going to do it in much less cases. Sanctions. It enables immediate reactions. It enables better calculation of the risk in order to create a sanction that actually fits the risk. And it creates a credible threat. If you know that my algorithm is going to set the price according to yours in a millisecond, okay, that creates a credible threat of me following your lower price and both of us setting the equilibrium at a lower level. Of course, high entry barriers must exist. And I find this very useful. This is from Manzini, 2019. And what she did is she looked at the different relevant factors that are often looked at to see if firms can collude. And she found that at least some of them can be affected by algorithms or increased by algorithms. For example, market transparency, frequency of interaction, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, so this was this first strand. The second strand is experiments. And here, the first one out, and this is an incredible study by 4 Italian economists, Calvano et al. And they have an article in AER, they have an article in Science. What they did is they experimented with 2 Q-learning pricing algorithms. Now, what are Q-learning? These are algorithms, machine learning algorithms. What they do is once in a while, they test something differently. So most of the time they would continue with a certain price, but once in a while you test how the market would react to different prices. And that way you learn market reactions and you learn to set the different prices, okay? And what they found is that tacit collusion emerged in more than 60% of the cases and at even a higher rates following sufficient stimulation. And these results were observed in significantly rich environment with up to 100 price levels. So this is very significant. Not only that, look at this graph. What they did is once the algorithm learned to coordinate, and by the way, it took the algorithms quite a time to coordinate, but once they learned, what they did is they mandated one of the algorithms to then, for one period, set a competitive price, okay? And almost immediately, the algorithm, once it learned, they returned to the super competitive level. And this is one of their conclusions here. What they say is what is most worrying is that the algorithms leave no trace of concerted action. They learn to collude purely by trial and error with no prior knowledge of the environment in which they operate, without communicating with one another, and without being specifically designed or instructed to collude. Now, why is that problematic? Partly because it's not captured under our agreements in restraint of trade, okay? Now, I know you can't read this. It's not an eye test, but what I try to put here are some of the additional studies, and there are more. They're accumulating. What different researchers are doing is that they're testing different types of algorithms, Q learning and other, different kinds of Q learning, different kinds of algorithms, and they're all showing, okay, or most of them are showing that algorithms learn to coordinate. Give the algorithm enough time, it will learn to coordinate by itself. Okay. Now, what is most interesting here is the empirical paper, and this is a paper by Assad et al. This is the third one from 2020. It's actually not even, I mean, it's published online, but it wasn't even published. I mean, this is so new. Okay, and what they did is they studied the German gasoline market, and what happened there is that for many years the prices were set by humans, and then the firms decided to use algorithms. So they have data on pricing before the use of algorithms and after. And what they have shown is that in a duopoly setting where you have two gas stations, both using algorithms, in every market, the price rose, and it rose by 9 to 28%. Incredible. Think about now, multiply this by many, many markets engaged in such coordination. And at least in my view, that's a real problem. So the bottom line here is that algorithms help facilitate coordination, and algorithmic coordination will affect some markets, and coordination may also relate to non-price aspects of market competition. Okay, it might be too complicated for us, in some markets, but algorithms can also assist in non-price aspects. Okay, third last part of my lecture. How much time do I have? Okay, great. So challenges for enforcement. With regard to some cases are simple, and I actually already talked with you about this. The Tompkins case, this is the one about the posters, okay, where you have a cartel agreement. The algorithm is only a facilitating device there. No problem. It's captured under agreement and restraint of trade. The problem is not one of applying the law. The problem might be one of detection. And one of the problems of detection is that you might see parallel prices, parallel similar prices, but these prices might be a result of such coordination, but they might also be part of a sign of algorithmic coordination, which is not captured. So what we have is a problem of enforcement rather than a legal problem here, okay, of capturing them. Okay. Hub and spoke. Hub and spoke cases have also come to the competition authorities and competition courts. We see more and more of these cases coming up. One famous case is the Oturas case from the ECJ from 2016. What we had there is 30 travel agencies in Lithuania, which used the same booking online system, which was called Oturas. And what happened was that Oturas imposed a technical restriction on discount rates. So nobody could give a discount rate of more than 3%. So it capped the discount rate. Okay, and it's then posted a notice in the system informing travel agencies of this change in the algorithm. And it was captured, and the question was, is this an agreement in restraint of trade? And the ECJ said, yes, definitely for Oturas, but for the travel agencies, only for those who opened the email, that you can prove that they knew, okay, that the algorithm changed, because this was a change in the algorithm and not an algorithm that they knew from the beginning that would cap their prices or discount rates, okay? But the most interesting question is, of course, what about algorithmic coordination? Is this oligopolistic coordination, which is not captured, or is this collusive agreement, which is captured? I mean, do algorithms create an agreement in the legal sense? Okay, how do we detect them? Who audits the algorithms? Who has the power to audit these algorithms? Enforcement, even if we find such algorithms, what do we do in terms of enforcement? So let me start by saying that the fact that we're using algorithms by itself does not prevent the application of competition law, okay? And also with regard to intent, I think that we can think about different ways. Maybe algorithms intend to achieve in certain goals, the designer intends to create coordination, or the user might intend to employ an algorithm if it knows that the algorithm is going to coordinate. And communication that we need for agreement, we might think about communication through decisional parameters. So the fact that we're using algorithms by itself does not prohibit us from applying the laws. The problem is our definitions of what an agreement is. However, we can capture algorithm as under some circumstances, and one of them is situations in which we have what you call facilitating practices or plus factors. Okay, this is based on the work of Steve Salop and others. And I try to apply it in my own work to all kinds of scenarios with algorithms. For example, if I make my algorithm transparent to you, and that kind of transparency does not assist consumers do not benefit from it. The fact that I made the algorithm transparent by itself might be seen as a facilitating practice and be prohibited by law. So we can limit some of these things indirectly. Other solutions that were, I mean, there's a lot of literature that's coming out in the last 5 years trying to find solutions, especially to algorithmic coordination. Okay, so one is transparency and explainability. It came from Ezrahi and Stuckey, and others have written about it. However, especially if we're talking about deep learning or machine learning algorithm, the transparency is problematic. It's costly for the creator of the algorithm. And if the algorithm changes all the time, transparency of the algorithm, you have to test it, you know, again and again. And again, if we're talking about algorithmic transparency, and that transparency is also to others in the market, that by itself might increase the ability to engage in coordination. Another solution that was suggested, partly by Mota and Pate in a wonderful article that I really loved, what they suggest is, for example, thinking about intervention triggers, you know, when the automatic monitoring of anomalies in the market, and once you see an anomaly, then the competition authority starts to investigate. Did I get it right? So to do that, you need data units in competition authorities, and we actually see these, you know, in the US, in Australia, in the UK. These are leading in creating these data units of computer scientists and data scientists. Now, what is the problem here? The problem is that even if we detect algorithmic coordination, it's not captured under our laws. And that's why we don't see cases, okay? Because it's not illegal, it is illegal. So now we can know more about the phenomena, but we haven't found a solution, okay? One potential way to go within the existing law is joint monopoly. So we talked before about excessive pricing. Excessive pricing also applies to a joint monopoly. Maybe we can capture some of the types of conduct. Other solutions, I think this is a very interesting solution, is changing the law, what you might call competition by design. And then the issue here, or the idea here, is to focus rather than on the agreement, focus on the outcome, or focus on the conduct, okay? And because one thing that is unique to algorithm is we can read their minds. We know what process they are engaged in. So there are many benefits to this. It goes to the root of the coordination. It aligns with experimental findings. It may be applied ex ante. However, there are also potential problems. And I want to only focus here on the last one, which information should be ignored by the firm. Okay, what are we going to tell the firm to do? It's a bit like, or not a bit, it's a lot like the criticism of Posner's suggestion many years ago to regulate tacit collusion or algorithmic coordination. What exactly are you telling the firm? Are you telling it to disregard the prices of its rivals? How will this affect innovation? Are you telling it to base prices only on its own cost? But that's price regulation. I mean, we might get there, but there's some problems. There's also literature created on private remedies, the incentives of platforms, for example, to limit prices. One wonderful paper is by Johnson, Rhodes, and Wildenbeest. What they suggest is that the platform, and they assume that the platform has an incentive for its suppliers to sell at lower prices on it, because that means that more consumers are going to stay on the platform. Okay, especially if there's some competition among platforms. So what they suggest in their paper is that if a seller has the lowest price in period 1, even if he increases the price in period 2 and 3, he would still be ranked first. So he would get some continuation, okay, of the benefit in order to create a carrot, okay, for him to price a low price. And Julia, yesterday, I thought your paper was excellent, and it fits here. Okay, the fact that Amazon can use the buy box, and it can use its own offerings in order to limit the prices of others. So, okay, and other suggested solutions. One of them is through merger policy. Okay, I don't have time to go into it. There's one of my papers from 2021 does that. I also have a paper that's not on SSRN yet, but it will be by me and by Dan Rubenfeld on AI and merger policy, that shows that in some situations we can capture these effects through mergers. And then there are out-of-the-box ideas like disruptive algorithms create noise in the system on the supply side, and the idea on creating noise on the demand side using algorithmic consumers. And I'm going to talk just a bit about this because I want to mention the use of AI also for remedies here. Okay, so one might be the mandatory sharing of not the data like everybody's talking about, but the mandatory sharing of the algorithm. Okay, so you might think about some situations in which the algorithm captured the learning from data that it obtained illegally, or that it created barriers for others to collect. Okay, so it now has a comparative advantage, which was illegally obtained. And if this is true, we might use this as a remedy by requiring the sharing of algorithms. Of course, it has advantages, disadvantages. Okay. Another thing is that the market can create the solution, algorithmic consumers. Okay. And what I mean here is that we often talk about the use of algorithms by suppliers, but why should we sit like ducks and not use algorithms by ourselves? I mean, we, the users, should also use algorithms in order to fight some of the effects of the algorithms used in the other side here. So consumers can identify the need, search for the best offer, execute its transaction, and do it all automatically. Okay, taking the data, the preferences from the consumers and from relevant data, maybe from IoT, from social media, and then analyzing the data, applying artificial intelligence in order to determine what to buy, and then buying it via shopping bots. And if you think this is science fiction, think again. And this is one example. You know, this is something that's from 2016 or 2017. I mean, and today we have many more examples. But I think it's a neat example because what Samsung did here is it joined forces with IBM, and it put a sensor under your detergent. And once the detergent level was low, it automatically ordered a new detergent based on your preferences. You like it to be hypoallergenic, you like it to be with a certain smell, doesn't matter. And then it uses your credit card, it sends it to your house, and you get the detergent. Okay, and you can even think about the next step here, which is a robot takes it and puts it in place. Okay. So this is, of course, something that can be done. There are many downsides like cyber harms and wrong preferences, reduction in autonomy, or all kinds of psychological effects, social effects. I love, you know, thinking through these. If you want, I have a paper that I wrote on these downside. But what I want to get to is the benefits. So some of the benefits is you can create, it's actually not supplier power, it's buyer power. Sorry, that's my mistake. You can create buyer power. If this algorithm works for many, you create buyer power on one side of the market that might counter some of the supplier power on the other side. It can also limit discrimination, because if the algorithm buys for all of us together, okay, the supplier doesn't know who we are. It interacts with the algorithm. It doesn't know what my preference is for different things. So we can limit anti-discrimination. And in some situations, it can limit collusion, but I'm leaving this aside. So just, you know, the small consumers then creating the buyer power against the strong, you know, supplier power here. I'm going to leave this. Whoop, whoop, whoop. Okay. So I'm at the end of my time. Sorry that I skipped, you know, very fast, but, you know, what I gave you here are things that are already happening. And then the question in what's next? And I think that one thing that I find really exciting to think about is where ChatGPT and LLMs, large language models, are going to take us, because they're changing market interactions. They're adding another layer of change in market interactions, which we should think about as scholars. But it's an exciting world, you know, of many, many issues. So these are some of the papers that I mentioned. There are many more. Thank you.